Scientific American has decided to endorse Kamala Harris president, a historic action where they have waded into politics only for the second time in the over 100-plus year history of that magazine. This magazine has been home to luminaries like Albert Einstein and some of the greatest scientific minds that are behind the driving force of scientific inquiry and Western civilization. So when they speak, a lot of people listen. And so as I began thinking about this endorsement, I began thinking about it in a rather uncommon way. In America, we talk a lot about separation between things. In fact, our country is founded upon the separation between society and the government. The notion that the government is not the whole of society. The government exists to preserve society. And of course, there are other separations that are known within our Constitution, some that are controversial, some that are not. But we don't talk enough about a separation, a wall between science and politics. And this Scientific American episode here is the latest reminder why we need to push for a separation between science and politics. And in this video, I'm going to talk to you about what that looks like, and I'm going to explain why this is necessary for the preservation of our republic by citing history, by going through the history of ideas, and by addressing the implications that science has for policymaking and the preservation of society. Before we get to that, my friends, hope all of you are doing well. I am Christian Watson. Thank you so much for being here. If you enjoy political or social commentary with a philosophical bent, then I must implore you, please like, share, comment, subscribe, do whatever you can to help us get our messages out there. We are so close to 20,000 subscribers, my friends. I am so excited. I am blessed to have all of you along this journey with me. I'm blessed to have all of you. I call you the pensive army of thinkers along this journey with me. And I'm grateful to have all of you giving your comments, giving your thoughts, because I don't know everything. I am just someone who has done research and is applying his mind to trying to address some of the problems that ail our country. So I appreciate all your support. If you want to, of course, continue to support me, you can like this video, you can comment on this video, share this video, you can donate to me as well if you feel so inclined, don't feel compelled to. Thank you guys so much, and now please enjoy the video. So, the Scientific American endorsement. I would be remiss if I didn't actually go through some of the reasons they have given for the endorsement. And I must tell you, the reasons they have given are absolutely nonsensical and they are specious. They seem plausible when you actually look at them, as we will in a moment. They fall apart and they are just absolutely shown for how erroneous they are. So the Scientific American, in the article endorsing Kamala, says the following, and I quote, "Vote for Kamala Harris to support science, health, and the environment." Now, let us stop right there. This was the headline of their endorsement. So, whenever someone tries to tell you that a single person or a political figure is going to be able to uphold abstract concepts, you should be concerned. You should be concerned because they are assigning godlike deific power to that political figure. How in the world can someone who is meant to commandeer the executive branch of the government, which is just one branch of the government, which in theory should have to work with the other branches, of course in practice it does not, we'll get into that in a second, how can that person possibly undertake such a massive task as upholding and supporting health? Well, Christian through legislation, Christian through directing the Department of Health to do things. Really? Does the health of population come from government edicts, or does it come from healthy habits and mentalities fostered by a citizenry that is concerned for its own well-being? The latter is obviously true because no amount of policy can make someone want to care for themselves. So that is the first error. They are suggesting this deific quality to the president that does not actually exist, but is reflective rather of an error that has been sustained in American political thought for over 125 plus years, which we'll address in a second. They then say, throughout the article, they go on to say, quote, "The U.S. faces two futures, pushing one candidate who, quote, offers the country better prospects, relying on science, solid evidence, and the willingness to learn from experience, or, they say, quote, in the other future, the new president endangers public health and safety and rejects evidence, preferring instead nonsensical conspiracy fantasies." So when they say science, when they say evidence, when they say learn from experience, they are actually using these things as symbols to convey something that they actually don't mean. They are actually using these things using these things as value judgments as prescriptions rather than descriptions, because obviously, without context, it means nothing to rely on science. Which science? Whose science? Junk science? Sound science? What's the standard? Obviously, the description is not going to go into all of that. Solid evidence. Whose evidence? The CDC's evidence? The NHS's evidence? Whose evidence? The evidence of think tanks that concoct studies that are funded by people that have a particular interest in getting a certain set of results. Whose evidence? When you speak in these abstract generalities, you essentially do what political symbols are designed to do. And for those of you who are not familiar with that concept, a political symbol is simply a concept, idea, or image that has a general meaning that is well understood, but has a meaning that is not set and can mean anything to different people. National security is a good example. Most people know what national security is, but a bad actor can change the definition of national security and get people to go along because they will believe they're going along with their original idea of national security. Same thing with this. What do they mean by these things? So this endorsement is not only erroneous in its assumptions, it's also vague enough to pose a danger to anyone that actually wants to understand substantive things they're talking about. But beyond the endorsement, as I mentioned, this reflects a much deeper scene that is happening in American politics and reflects the broader issue of the marriage between science and politics that America has seen since the Progressive Era. So in order to understand the arguments I'm about to make, we're going to take a very short trip down memory lane to the Progressive Era, and particularly to the writings of one of the luminaries of the Progressive Era, Woodrow Wilson. Now, Woodrow Wilson had an article, The Study of Administration, that he wrote in 1887. And the Study of Administration's main argument, and I'll actually quote from one of the descriptions of the Study of Administration, was to show that the science of administration could stand outside of the bounds of the Constitution and could help people, bureaucrats and government, administer the government. This may seem very familiar with you, and it should, because in recent conversations we've been talking about the administrative state and its effect on the American life. Well, Woodrow Wilson was the intellectual godfather of the administrative state, and the Study of Administration was essentially the Bible, so to speak, of the administrative state, the blueprint that justified its existence in American life. I'll go on. Woodrow Wilson also believed that the science of administration was key to the progressives' attempts to solve contemporary social, economic, and political programs. The progress of history and the shaping of public opinion by elites promised that the end of politics would eventually be achieved. This was the realm of politics. Very different, according to Wilson, was the sphere of administration, which dealt not with the broad ends of politics, but with the application of bureaucratic, technical, and scientific expertise to particular details or the means of government. This description goes on to say, Wilson, a key contributor to the development of the modern administrative state, argued that administrative powers were extra-constitutional and need not be bound by the checks and balances and the separations of powers of the U.S. Constitution. And because of Wilson and those who followed after him, because of their machinations, we now have a civil service, bureaucratic civil service, that have civil service protections, which makes them exempt from being fired or corrected by the chief executive, the president, which is unconstitutional, and not only that, violates the third pillar of the three pillars of the separation of powers concept, which is the transparency pillar. There are three pillars. The first pillar is the non-delegation principle, that you cannot delegate your authority to other branches of government. We do that all the time. The second pillar is a non-combination principle, which is that one branch of government cannot combine its authority or the authorities of other branches into its own branch. It's a corollary of the first principle. And the third one is the executive has to be able to fire people. The transparency principle. Well, the administrative state breaks all of those, but especially the third one. So, how does this relate to the relationship between science and politics? Well, science, my friends, is simply a methodology of measurement, of observation that allows us to apply our mind to particular things in the natural world, and then by using this methodology, extract some meaning from those things. But science has significant limitations because science fundamentally deals with physical matters. Science does not necessarily deal with matters that are non-physical or that concern other domains of human life. You will see the limitations of science when you get into trying to understand how the human mind works and the relationship between that and emotions. Emotions are one of those things within the human being that are sometimes just so elusive that we still don't have a very good understanding of them. Some people may say, well, emotions are just dopamine. They're just processes that happen in the brain, but that doesn't actually explain their totality. That is actually a very insignificant base explanation. So science has limitations because it is limited to physical questions. But there's this ideology that has been very popular in the past 20th century. It's an ideology called Scientism. Many of you maybe have heard of it. Scientism says that all questions about reality and society can be reduced to physical explanations. Science in this worldview knows all. Well, there's a corollary to this that's not talked about as much, and it's one that I think I've discovered. It's called political scientism. Political scientism, which represents what Woodrow Wilson was talking about, is the idea that says all political questions must be routed through the experts, and through no other means can political questions be truly discovered. Now, the problem with scientism is that not all questions are matters of physical observation, as we just established. But the problem with political scientism is even more astute, and that is not all political matters are matters of specialization. In fact, politics is simply applied ethics. Many political matters are matters of ethics in overlapping categories that demand as many approaches as possible to solve, not a single approach based on some technocratic, bureaucratic superiority that political scientism gives. The danger with having this mentality about science married with politics is that it leads precisely to the kind of political structure that Woodrow Wilson helped birth, which is the administrative state, which is managerialism, where the people cannot effectively consent to the political authority over them because those who are actually making the laws are not the ones who were either elected, and they're not subject to the same constraints as elected officials technically are. So what happens with political scientism is that it creates an expert class, a dictatorial class, a managerial class that is not accountable to the people and that rules over the people and therefore impacts civil society in the absolute worst way. But this is only one consequence of marrying science with politics. The other consequence of marrying science with politics is that science can sometimes be very abstract in what it deals with and cannot always connect to the particular situations and demands of a particular topic or a particular area. So much so that it's very easy to simply say, science says X, without actually evaluating what can science give us in this particular situation that is going to be the most beneficial thing to us, as opposed to just what science says. During the COVID pandemic, we actually saw the limitations of scientific application to policy. And the limitations were as follows. Science was put on a higher totem pole than ethics was. That is why there were so many governors like Newsom and Cuomo and other people like Fauci who were out in the public sphere saying trust the science and using their expertise, using their technical credentials to make policies that were unethical, shutting down churches, imposing curfews on people and jailing them simply for walking around their own neighborhood, so on and so forth, jailing people for deciding to freely assemble, which is a cardinal right of the American birthright, the American political experiment. These things were fundamentally violations of ethical principles, but the science was the overriding standard because science was given this undue emphasis in the society, and ethics was not accurately considered. Now, some may say, Christian, what if you just merged scientific application of politics with ethical application of politics? Well, you can try to do that, but the problem is very simply this. There are times where the two can be at odds, or there are times when the demands of ethics may take away from the demands of science, and now you have two competing forces, or in this case, two competing institutions. And we know when we talk about political power, there's always competition, there's always antagonism, there's always a clash, and this may impact the ability to legislate and to govern properly. If you believe that political problems can be solved scientifically, this can then justify bureaucratic expansion into the private lives of people, and this is a danger to their personal freedoms. But also, the final reason why science and politics should be separate is that science and politics are like oil and water. They don't mix very well. When they do mix, it's chaotic. Science is primarily focused on inquiry. It has a purpose, and a very important purpose. It's focused on inquiry, on discovering, on shedding the light of truth on things that are within its scope. Politics is a game, a sick game of antagonism and competing forces that will take anything that comes into its measure and convert it into a boon, into a benefit for whatever competing party happens to get its hands on it, irregardless of if it's true. This is why you will see political ads that have mistruths and lies in them, because it's not about the truth. It's about damaging your opponent. This is why so many different crooked things happen within the sphere of politics. So, therefore, if you mix science and politics, we can believe that science can be taken away from its due responsibility of finding the truth and shedding light, and be used in a very narrow way that applies to the wishes of whatever politician now has its hands on science. In other words, the aims of politics, the norms of power, and the norms of science, they don't mix, and the norms of power can spoil the fruits of scientific inquiry. So in my opinion, my friends, given the disastrous history that science has within the American political history of ideas, going back to Wilson, given the fact that science has been applied in a very bad way during the COVID pandemic to justify unethical things, and given the fact that science and politics don't mix well because they have two different ethos, or however you would say that plurally, perhaps we should declare as Americans a fundamental separation between scientific inquiry and political policy and political discussion, and maintain that separation by treating both domains with the respect they deserve, but protecting science from politics in the same way the American experiment demands we protect our religion and our churches from political intrusion as well. That is the only way we can reverse what has been a scary trend in using official-sounding ideas and concepts given by speciously applied scientific principles to justify tyranny. That is the only way we can right the course between the perverse relationship between the scientific establishment and the government. That is the only way we can ensure that the things that come from the institutional scientific establishment can be trusted and are not tainted by the biases of those in power who have something to gain from them giving a particular answer, regardless of if that answer is the truth. So my friends, will you join me in declaring a separation between science and politics so that we can set this ship right and we can safeguard the tools that we need to understand the world? Will you join me in condemning the uses of science within political sphere, such as eugenics, or such as justifying lockdowns and the freedom of association violations simply for some broader goals that are abstract, and instead leave science within the realm of people who can do it well, who can do it ethically? Will you join me in doing all these things? Because I think that is what it's going to take in order to address the problem that I'm seeing here and that I've discussed in this video, my friends. Thank you guys so much for watching. Like, share, comment, subscribe, do whatever you can to get this message out there, my friends. Study history, study philosophy, moral conviction, and please stay pensive. Bye, guys.